How are you?
Good. All right. Well, and the Willie's coming back. There we go. All right. You two have a great time. Looking forward to this one.
Thank you. We're here.
What's
We're
up?
here. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm
Excited?
good.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
Okay, how does it feel? First book is in the world. How does it feel?
It's in the world, and there's anxiety because you never really know how the world is going to handle and embrace what you feel you are attempting to birth into the world. And so, I'm grateful for all the midwives along the way that got us to this point. But yeah, anxiety and excitement, those living together, those cousins of emotions that I'm experiencing right now.
I'm sorry. Come on, cousins of emotions. We're gonna have a great time tonight. Silencing white noise. Give me the moment, the grounding moment that you were like, I gotta write this book.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't sound cliche, but I knew I had to write this book the day I looked at my son's face and realized that this is going to be one day another Black man in America who lives under the constant threat and visitation of nonsensical violence by the state and by individuals. And I said, I'm thinking like I'm an activist, I'm a pastor, but have I really done enough to shape what the racial mood is in this country? So the moment that I looked into his eyes and realized that this is a vulnerable life, this is an unprotected life that I decided should come into the world, it pressed me to do something, and this book came to mind from there. And it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt that it was a year where we saw the very public death of George Floyd. And in the middle of writing this book, I saw a nation really turning on itself on January 6th, which was fueled by both racism and religion. So the confirmation that I was on the right track and that time was really running out was January 6th.
So, and for those who are watching, if you have questions, put them in. There's a Q&A option for you to put them in. We'll read them, and Willie will answer them. I just got a question. So talk to me a bit more about, you said you had not done enough to speak to these issues of this intersection of race and faith and what is happening in that space. And yeah, I wonder, like, I is that our work to do? So yeah. I want to hear more about your thoughts, because that's challenging me even right now.
Yeah. So I'm of the opinion that racism is white people's job to abolish. That's my opinion. But the reality is that Black folk have to do the work of anti-racism and racial justice out of a sense of survival, out of a pure desire for survival. Right. And so, although it is the work of white folks, there's no time to wait for someone else to do it. It's an incredible burden that I don't think people who live under structural and historic victimization should have to carry. But out of necessity, it's the work that I find myself doing. As an anti-racist educator, one who's developed curricula around this, as a pastor of a historically Black congregation, as a professor. I'm always trying to figure out, like, what ways am I attempting to contribute to human flourishing, and how Black folk and brown folk can access that against this history that has really been unforgiving and unrelenting.
And you give us these 6 principles, and I want you to talk about them a little bit, but I will say when I read the book and I meant what I said when I say that I think that you are one of the most prophetic pastoral voices of my generation. I mean that wholeheartedly. I felt it was giving Howard Thurman-esque vibes. Like I was like, what is Willie doing to me? He got me thinking about anti-racism, spirituality, what my moral compass is as I'm moving through the world. So talk a bit about these principles and what called you to frame this work in such a way that you did.
No, I really appreciate that question. And I appreciate the vote of confidence that you have. I consider you one of the most prophetic voices of our generation. And so to hear that from you is incredibly exciting, but also it lifts a bar that I say, man, I really need to live up to this. And she's saying this, right? But so, and I'm also really, really honored that a kind of Howard Thurman fusion was happening, was percolating somewhere as you were reading it, because my favorite writer is James Baldwin. But my favorite religious writer, like overtly religious writer, is Howard Thurman. And so as I was thinking about like the art of doing the work of racial justice as something that happens introspectively, as something that happens interpersonally, but also something that has to happen institutionally. I said, man, my lot in the world is as a spiritual leader, as somebody who guides folk toward lives of meaning and lives of possibility. And what I was feeling is like there is, in this space, in this racial justice space, there's still an empty hole that can be filled with spiritual practices, right? So I was really searching for, as I'm writing, I'm searching, right? I was writing myself into clarity in a lot of ways. And so as I'm writing, I'm thinking like, no, what is the spirituality that undergirds all of this racial justice work I do? There's something that makes me better, but there's also something that sustains me for this work. And like, I think that was that Howard Thurman reality pulling on me from eternity, pulling on me, saying, no, you have an opportunity to articulate a spirituality of anti-racism, a spirituality of racial justice. And so that's what I was working toward. And I also realized that all the books I've read on anti-racism work, very few of them actually center the idea of practices, right? They tell us how to talk about race. They tell us what racism is and how it functions. But, and maybe I just haven't read as widely as I should have, is that, but where are the actual practices that ground us in a tradition of goodness, in a tradition of abolition, right? There have been people who've been doing this work for so long, and that there are practices that we can pull on that can ground us, but also forward us. So that's what got me there. And so I call these rhythms of reparative intercession, right? Rhythms of reparative intercession. I went with rhythms because I wanted to be clear that what we are engaging is not a science, it is an art to be experimented on. Like I don't intend to be an absolute authority on this, but I wanted to offer practices or frameworks for practices, or they're really processes when you read them. Like, it's not like do this, do that. These are processes that you can lean into. And so I thought rhythm sort of spoke to what's artistic about this work. I thought rhythm spoke to the fact that there's something complex about what we're trying to engage. And I chose rhythm, and I say this in the book, because I'm always reminded of the moans and the groans and the taps and the beats of our ancestors on ships named Jesus and Amazing Grace, but also in the clearings right outside plantations. Rhythms is what carried what carried my people and still carry my people in a lot of ways. And then I wanted to talk about the work of doing anti-racism as a work of speaking up and acting up on behalf of other folk, right? So I went with intercession. So many of us may be familiar with the Christian tradition of intercessory prayer, where we do something on behalf of another, or as I talk about Parker Palmer saying, what does it mean to stand in the tragic gap? Growing up in a Southern church that was Baptist, you know, we talked regularly about what it meant to stand in the gap for someone. And so I was thinking the work of standing in the gap can't just be about prayer. It has to also be political. It has to be economic, and it has to be the work of repair, right? It has to do the work of repairing what has been harmed. And so that's how I get to these 6 practices. And I don't know if you want me to like voice those over right now, but that's how I got to these 6 practices. So I start with what's called cues to color, where I talk about embracing difference as a gift. You know, one of the things that I loathe is when my well-intentioned white friends tell me I don't see color. And I'm like, no, I'm literally a Black man, and I want you to see me as a Black man,
right?
because this skin carries meaning, right? And if you deny the truth of this, if you deny what this skin means in this world, then you deny my experience, and you don't make space to understand what it feels like to carry this body around, right? I say I wrote the book because I looked in the face of my Black son, right? Like, his Black body means something, and if we're not careful, his Black body will incite fear. No matter if he goes to Harvard, no matter if he wears suits most days of the week, his Black body will elicit fear for some folks. So that cues to color, embracing difference. I also talk about the idea of the momentum to encounter, the necessity to confront the history of whiteness that lives in all of our institutions, but also has the capacity to inhabit all of our bodies, right? You know, I am a Black man, but I don't act as if anti-Blackness doesn't show up in me sometimes, right? And that comes from somewhere. It comes from a history that we have to be willing to engage. I talk about the third rhythm that I talk about is pattern recognition, which is our capacity to honor our interdependence, that we are actively and literally doing lives that are linked together. Pattern recognition, seeing ourselves, understanding ourselves. The fourth practice is syncopated identity, where I talk, you see, I'm drawing on rhythm motifs, music motifs here. Although the book, you know, I hope the book sings within itself, but I'm drawing on these rhythm ideas here. But syncopated identity is where we actually take seriously that there are multiple selves within this self, right? I'm not just a Black man. I'm also middle class. I'm also a U.S. citizen. I'm also, heterosexual, which often means that I am a perpetuator of patriarchy, misogyny, misogynoir, a perpetuator. You know, I have the capacity to perpetuate xenophobia if I'm not careful. I have the capacity to lift heteronormativity. So embracing the fullness of who I am, exploring my fuller self, this syncopated identity also sets me up so that my patriarchy does not disrupt or negate my anti-racism, right? The sixth rhythm, the fifth rhythm is the pulse to risk, where I talk about sacrificing our power and our privilege. And that last rhythm that I work through is downbeat truth, learning how to name your complicity with racism, what I call telling on yourself, right? How do we harvest the discomfort of telling on ourselves in ways that make a difference for others?
So one of the reasons why I wanted you to do that is because, yes, it very much harkens back to and leans into the rhythm, the culture of who we are. but it was very much and is millennial, like that there's something about how we engage with music and movement culturally to do this work, right? And so I wanted to ask you what has been kind of guiding principles that you have um, borrowed from, inherited from previous generations that you believe are key as we continue to work to shape generations who, and I say this, I'm trying to find the right way to say it, but the ways that I think younger generations and younger folks are being shaped around this work, particularly in these kinds of moments, can be very interesting and tricky, right? And like, what do you see as values and principles and lessons that we're gathering from previous generations that get to be, passed down and hope?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. Let me answer it this way. One, I think the art of resilience and survival that you and I are beneficiaries of, and in a lot of sense, you model that for so many of us. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many of us are drawn to you, because of your sense of resilience and vulnerability with which you do that. So this art of resilience that our people have demonstrated. I mean, to survive 403 years of this organized conspiracy against Black folk is nothing short of a miracle. And so like that is something that I pull from previous generations. Being faithful out loud is something that I love about previous generations. I think one of the challenges, and this was also part of the impetus of the book, is I'm not really okay with Christianity being, I'm a follower of Jesus. I don't regularly call myself a Christian. I regularly call myself a follower of Jesus, a follower of the way. But I do have serious concerns about how the Jesus tradition has been co-opted by a certain faction of a certain brand flavor of Christianity, because those of us, and I'm a unabashed person of on the left, right? That's what I am, right? And sometimes that gets me in trouble saying that out loud. But one of the things we don't do on the on that side of the U.S. is, right, on that side of the divide, is like we don't act like we have faith lives, right? And part of the reason why this tradition of Jesus is so easily co-opted is because people who think like me, worship like me, and can look across lines and want to cross those boundaries don't speak loudly enough about how we are influenced by faith, right? Racial justice work for me is a faith commitment. It's an article of faith for me. Environmental justice is an article of faith for me. Being committed to anti-sexism and anti-homophobia or anti-queer phobia is an article of faith for me. And so what I loved about the Ella Baker time is that they were marching with hymns, marching, singing songs that they pulled right out of Sunday morning, like, so that having faith out loud is something that's important. And another thing, and maybe I'll stop here, but another thing that the previous generations give us is a sense of what it means to be willing to do life with folk who are not like you. The willingness to step across the aisle and not demonize someone because they thought differently from you. I mean, it's phenomenal that I have a mentor named Virgil Wood, and he says that it was Daddy King that gave George Wallace his ticket to heaven, right? You have this serial segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Guy who fought against his son fiercely, viciously. And this is the man who goes to the former governor and says, we forgive you, right? Now, I'm not good at that, but there's something powerful about it, right? It's like the Emmanuel Nine, right? Their family members extending grace to Dylan Ruth. Like, that's an outgrowth of what that generation offered to us. And I see shirts that say I'm not my ancestor, and I get that. I understand what they're trying to say, but there's so much about that love ethic that was able to divorce someone's evil ideologies from their identity and still find space to offer grace. Is a place where I want to live. And that's the work that's happening. That's the work I have to keep doing, right? Because I ain't really there yet. I have issues with people who stoke insurrections and then move, away off the public scene. I have issues, but I want that kind of extension of grace for folk who ideologically are not like me, but their identities are still human. They're still people who are worthy and deserving of love.
So you have completely convicted me on a lot of stuff that we can really talk about offline in just that moment. But I think one of the things that, as I was listening to you, it really took me back to an earlier point that you said about how a lot of these books, a lot of this work isn't grounded in practice, right? And that that there has been this kind of this separation of an infused spirituality, a faith ethic to this work, right? And a lot of that, I do think, has to do with the ways that the church has, unfortunately, ostracized and alienated many people who have been on the front lines of this work, who don't embody, the identities that are typically what are leaders in Black church. They're not all Black straight men, right? And so there has been this move away from this kind of embracing of faith practices and spiritualities in this work. That I think the beauty of a book like this is that it brings us back to the reality that there is something otherworldly, right? That holds us to this work, that pushes us and even sustains us when things go left, because that's the truth. Like, that this is not, sometimes people talk about how it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Sometimes I don't even feel like a marathon, right? It just feel like we just here, right? And so when I appreciate that this is a book that recovers, I want to use that, recovers the fundamental spirituality that for many people guides this work. And I think that this is why it is going to resonate with so many people who are reading, and not only who've been looking for those connections, but people who are like, I know I'm feeling something. I don't know what I'm feeling when I do this. And you help to give them that language, which is one of the things that I'm really excited about as it relates to this book. I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you about your process. What was it like writing Silence and White Noise? What was your process?
Yeah, so there were moments in the writing process that I felt extraordinarily overwhelmed. And there were times that I felt like I was running out of words. And I
Wow.
generally think of myself as a student of words, as you know, I call myself a rhetorical professional. I preach for a living. I speak for a living. It's what I do. But the enormity of, or at least the enormity that I framed this project for within myself. You know, sometimes I did feel like I was bumping up against a wall. You know, sometimes groping for originality, right? Just try to be intentionally original. But what was helpful is that I gave myself permission to not write the book in order. So actually the first chapter I wrote was actually chapter 6, which was a chapter on, which is the chapter that talks about the pulse to risk, where I frame out this spirituality that I think undergirds this kind of work, what I call abolitionist spirituality. So that's the first chapter I wrote. So I gave myself permission to not write the book in order. I also gave myself permission to not write the chapters in order, right? That if there was something that I knew would be in the middle of the chapter, but it was yelling, pick me, that's where I went, right? So I allowed myself to just write freely and create the connective tissues later, right? It's sort of like a consciousness dump that I allowed myself to do. And then I went back to make it artistic, right? To do the writing pieces. Another thing that I did was I wrote on location, whatever that means in terms of writing. 2 chapters I wrote in New Orleans. And you know, there's a very particular, although New Orleans does not come up in the book. I mean, there's a very particular racial history of that beautiful city. Not only is it, you know, one of my favorite American cities, but it tells a story of race in ways that I needed to settle into. So being on location like that was really important for me. There are parts of the book that I actually wrote from inside a U.S. prison. There were pieces that I teach in a prison. You know, I actually direct a prison, a master's degree program at Sing Sing prison, and so there were parts of this book that I wrote like right after teaching a class, sitting at my desk at Sing Sing, thinking about the fact that I'm in a place that warehouses Black and brown men. That spoke to my creativity. And, you know, I always had, and I had to do a lot of reading for this, but I wanted to make sure that as I was writing, that I was perfuming my thoughts with fiction, right? Perfume, you know, so I'm reading, you know, Mother Toni Morrison. I'm reading, you know, the works of Baldwin. I'm reading poetry to perfume my thoughts because I didn't want the language to be too academic. And I know there are moments in it where it could feel so technical, but the fact that it all doesn't feel so technical is because I had to access something, another gear. I had to access another muscle that you know, I had to get in the poetic weight room. And wrestle with the language and prose of some of my favorite writers, and I needed to have Coltrane very close to me, and so one of my favorite songs is "A Love Supreme," and so I needed that album near me as I was writing as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny because I wondered about you writing at Sing Sing. One, because of how pivotal and impactful that work is that you feel very much called to, and I knew in some way that you would write something while you were there, and just the reality again of, right, you know, like what does it look like to do this kind of work, going back every day, right, into a space where we are constantly faced with the what I call it, it's not even our feelings, but the potential of our work, right, to be dismissed and dismantled, like, and I knew you were gonna write there, so I was really excited, and I think somebody needs to write about how all, like, there are so many books that get written to Coltrane, and I and I think, like, we gotta talk about just how much.
Right, we probably
He
need like
is,
a Coltrane fest script to just talk
yeah.
about how that brother's work
Oh my
fuels our
God.
work.
Yes. Oh my God. Like, I'm writing to him now, and it's amazing. We have a question. How is the spiritual call to respond to anti-racism also a call to a faith-based abolitionist movement? And how could the church use your principles to extend the project of abolition?
No, I think that's a phenomenal question. And I mean, there's a reason why I named this spirituality that undergirds how I think about anti-racism as abolitionist spirituality. And I believe abolitionist spirituality has to undergird all of these systems and structures that we know must go. And even if we don't know what replaces these things, we know they must go. I think about faith. I think about abolition itself as a type of faith, right? I think it takes incredible imagination, and it takes an act of faith to say that the only world you've ever known the way it is can be fundamentally different than the way it is. Like that itself is a practice of faith. But yeah, I talk about in that sixth chapter, that fifth chapter, I talk about abolitionist spirituality in relation to the post risk, that risking has to be fueled by, and then the person must be preserved by whatever that spirituality is. I talk about it as a socially conscious, freedom anchoring spirituality that critiques the status quo, that centers the lives of the lives and experiences of unprotected people, but at the same time, it points us towards something new, right? And so when I think about this abolitionist movement, it is just as much about what must go. It's just as much about what we must build as much as it is about what must go. And I think churches can benefit from what I call these invitations of abolitionist spirituality, that every day we have to choose to be in relationship with people who are unprotected, that we have to have a sacred intolerance to inequity as a form of sin, right? We have to be so intolerant of inequity because it is sin, right? The church can learn from that, that we have an urgent mandate to disrupt structures that are oppressive, right? The church has the capacity to be a classroom to what is wrong in our world, but also an incubator for those who are going to fix it, right? So churches are classrooms for how we raise our consciousness about what's wrong in our world, but it is also the incubator for revolution. It is also the place that we are prepared to do that work. Another invitation that I talk about is that we have to do the work of repairing the mind and bodies of the violated, right? That churches ought to be spaces. You know, I don't know if safe space actually exists in this world. I don't know that. But I do know that churches ought to be the closest thing to it. Like, churches ought to be the closest thing to safe space, the closest thing to brave space that we can imagine. Like, I can't forget, like, I'll say it again, that Black churches don't grow out of chapels. Black churches grow out of clearings in the woods. They grow out of brush harbors, that what was known as the invisible institution, right? It was a space that, maybe I'm romanticizing, but it was a space that was safe because it was outside the gaze of whiteness. It's an opportunity for those of us who are Black to reclaim brush harbor spirituality and relinquish this plantation religion that we've been fed, right? But how do we get back to faith communities being brush harbors, being places where lives are actually repaired, because those are places where we can be brave, and places that have been shaped as safe for us. And that last invitation is an invitation to a daily renewal of a counter imagination that is connected to action that rebuilds something, right? Churches have an incredible amount of resources, many of those people resources, right? Human resources. How do we use that to actually nurture an imagination, and not just a place of reflection? I think one of the dangers of so many of our churches is that they're places of reflection only. They are places that so often we fund nostalgia. We spend all of our money trying to reclaim what was and will never be again, when we actually have an opportunity to imagine something new and then dare to build what we imagine.
Yeah, that's good. But we got another question, but I want to stay with this for a minute, because one of the things that I thought about as I went through the book again, that stung me the first time I read the book, that I wanted to ask you about, is how do you, and it's in a very much aligned with this question about the church and how the church can use its principles. I remembered reading it, and it was not about it was not that the book gave me this sense of hopelessness, but I remembered feeling like January 6th happened. These white folks ain't ever gonna get it right. How do you work to help restore the faith that people want to have in humanity?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the perennial question, right? It's the perennial conundrum that I wrestle with. But it's me as a personalist, as somebody who fundamentally believes in the inherent good of the person. That and that's a real departure from Christian theology, right? I grew up that I am. I grew up, total depravity. I grew up Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, rich like me, right? But I have a stubborn belief that there is something good in all human beings and all persons, and that there is occasion for us to tap into that. So that's part of how I reclaim myself. That's how I repossess my life. When I'm possessed by hope, that last chapter, not the last chapter, the conclusion, I talked about my own fatigue in this work. I talked about not just my pandemic fatigue soul, but I had an activist fatigue soul. And it was this reminder that every day I have to work on my hope. Every day I have to remind myself, not just that, Willie, you have some sexism in you. Willie, you have some homophobia in you. Willie, like that's what it means to be a good intercessor. That's what it means to be a good ally, accomplice, right? I know that work. I have to do that work, but I have to also do that work of telling myself that change is actually possible in the face of if January 6th doesn't happen, the January 6th and the light, if that doesn't happen, then this doesn't require faith. It doesn't require faith if everything is pointing in the direction of amelioration and transformation. It is actually the fact that January 6th of the world is what makes this work a practice of faith and a reinvention of hope every single day. So those are two ways I think about it. But the other thing is to not have hope is to not be alive in some ways. And I don't have the like my family can't afford for me to be a corpse, a living corpse. My our congregation cannot afford to have a pastor who is not going to lie about the fact that I have hopeless, pessimistic moments. It's real, right? There are days I'm like, yo, white folk are not going to change.
Right.
There are days I tell myself, upper middle class black folk who don't want to support black folk aren't going to change either, right? There are days that capitalism tells me that democracy, the way I understand it, is not possible, and that nobody's looking out for the most, and Christianity ain't possible either, right? There are days that I feel that, and I want to be honest about those moments, but then I have to also do that work out loud that allows me to repossess myself from the things that tell me to give up, the things that tell me it's not possible. And then, you run into white siblings who are really trying to get it. And then you say, the fact that they're really trying to get it says that it is possible.
Yeah. I think, we had this question from Ruth Lowry that she said, in your conclusion chapter, you quote Baldwin, "Hope is invented every day."
Yeah.
Later in that chapter, you write, "If we abandon racial justice, we abandon God. This heartens me and gives me bread for the journey." I kept reading, feeling energized until your last statement in this paragraph, quote, "I think we can change ourselves and the public if we do something anti-racist every day as an infleshment of hope. We are not helplessly at the mercy of our political institutions, economic organizations, or impulses. If we face it all with courage, we can do something never before seen in the history of this country, which is win the American Revolution and realize our survival as one people." Ruth asked these questions. Are we one people? Is that God's call to us? If we white folks are willing to listen to the voices from the Brush Harbor, we could be one people. But my fear is that as we tilt toward quote unquote one people, watering down the gospel that Jesus and Jeremiah and William Augustus Jones preached. So, her questions come back to, are we one people? Yeah. Is that God's call to us? And to think more about this notion of being one people in this moment.
In chapter 1 of the book, I wrestle with this idea of distinguishing oneness from sameness. And I don't think that we're all the same, and we're definitely not all the same to the extent that we're treated the same, right? That's not true, but we're also not the same because it is the particularity, the peculiarity, it is the multiplicities that makes humanity. What I think is a representation of the diversity of the image of God, right? So I always want to honor the diversity of the Imago Dei that is imprinted on all people. I do believe that to be one allows us to own the fact that all of our destinies are tied together without us having to be the same, right? That all of, like, we occupy this one planet, that we all go by human being, right? And there are even scientific ways of talking about that. So I hope for the day that our diversity can be celebrated as one people, as one creation, that we are able to find synergy with one another, and the same way we're able to find synergy with the whole of creation. And I do think that is God's vision for the world, a world of peace that does not deny my difference, but also doesn't demonize my difference, right? Oneness in the sense that we're able to live in a kind of unity that assaults the things that are assaulting us, right? That I talk about in that chapter, that whiteness must die to us so that we will stop dying to whiteness, right? I do believe that there is a kind of, one writer talks about this as ontological intimacy, right? Is that we're able to, that at our core, we are connected in ways that we've not given ourselves over to. And so when I think about oneness, I think about this idea of giving ourselves over to a vision of the world where everyone has exactly what they need, where love is really what is governing life. And that difference is perceived as beautiful and as gift, and not as something demonized or something disparaging. So I do believe that is the vision of for our world. And I don't know, Dr. Wright is one of my mentors. I don't know that Dr. Wright would disagree with that. I don't know that Dr. Wright would disagree with that. Dr. Wright has a very clear a hand on the pulse of where America is and probably where America will be for a long time. But there's something incredibly hopeful about how he understands this world could be if white people decided to do their part, to do this work. Unfortunately, this is hinged on the fact, this is not God's work to do. This is white folks' work to say, we actually really want to lean into our humanity more than we want to lean into our whiteness.
And with that, I don't just want white people to read this book. There's something about the reclamation of hope for all of us to realize that it's possible to have a better world. And you in this book have laid out what steps we can take to ensure that we can inch a bit closer to that. And so again, I am honored to just be with you, to have gotten to read it and feast on it. And I know what it will do in the world, and I'm grateful that you have lent your voice in this space to do this work. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for saying that, and thank you for reading it and offering a charitable read of it at that. As somebody who is a consummate author, your book is doing incredible things in the world. Red Lipstick Theology. I was on the plane coming. I was on the plane coming from an event where I was talking about my book, and I look across the aisle, and the sister who's sitting in the window is reading Red Lipstick Theology. I had to take a picture of it and send it to Candice. So just so she could know just how powerful that is. I'm looking for the day that I get on the plane and I walk past first class and somebody is holding Silencing White Noise in their hands. And
it's coming. It's coming. It is coming. It is coming, because this is a powerful, powerful book. The link to purchase it, if you do not already have it, is in the chat. Baker Book put it in the chat. Please get a copy for you, one for your friend, one for your pastor. This is a necessary and vital work, and not only support Willie, but support that baby that was the inspiration behind and the impetus to do this work. He will greatly appreciate that as well.
I believe it. I believe it.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It is an honor, and on behalf of Baker Bookhouse and on behalf of Willie, I thank you so much. And the information again is in the chat to purchase his book, and we will see you on social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Peace.